Hello everyone, and welcome back, my friends, to the RimWorld Gun Empire series, where, my compadres, we are currently having a few power issues. As you could imagine, at the end of last episode, when a small, dirty nuclear warhead was dropped near the base, it completely wiped out all of our sources of power generation. So, well, all power sources except for our small nuclear reactors. However, these barely keep on 2 or 3 light bulbs, so we're going to end up building a mid-sized one to try to help us out with that. I'm afraid though, even with our mid-sized reactor, we won't be able to keep all our lights on nor our electronics going, so we're going to need to build some additional small ones as well. And in the meantime, we're also going to be working on an advanced nuclear generator as well, as this is going to be much larger and thus put out a shit ton more power that we'll be able to keep on the inside of the base instead of outside, so it should be completely safe from attacks. Now you might be asking yourself, Rat Daddy, you stupid rodent, how are you going to do any research if you can't even power your research bench? Well, my good friend, that is where this little tiny portable chem fuel generator comes in handy. This bad little mamma jamma is going to get our asses back out of the dark ages and get some lights going on around here, as well as getting our ammo and weapon production back up and running. I'm not going to lie to you though, most of today will most likely be us doing some repairs around the base like we're doing right now, trying to fix the gate entrance on our eastern side. Unfortunately, I did notice that our Toxalope mistake, as well as all of our Boomalope, were beginning to starve to death. We ended up feeding them some of our food, corn in particular. If you remember last episode and the bomb, yeah, all that stuff, that actually ended up rendering our fields outside completely useless, so we can't grow hay out there. Speaking of which, we noticed something strange outside. Those appeared to be Marshal Service vehicles, though we could hardly tell from the ground. Couldn't imagine where they might be rushing to. Nevertheless, we still have plenty of work that needs to be done around here, like repairing our western gate and fixing the garage doors for our mech garage. Also, as you might imagine, our new nuclear generators that we're researching are going to be quite large, so we're going to need a lot more room in our generator room. We began digging out a very large section of the room and adding in all of our pretty little flooring. Just to be safe though, because we were getting awful close to our bedrooms and our mech gestating room, I decided to add in some super armored walls. We've already seen what a nuclear explosion right in front of the base can do. I'd really hate to see what one that was uncontrolled could do from the inside. We would also end up adding in another mid-sized nuclear power generator, although this really didn't do all that much. I suppose we did get a few extra lights on around the base, so it's worth something. As you all probably remember from last episode, we ended up building a Cherokee helicopter towards the end. However, we don't have a good landing spot for it yet. So as we were replacing a lot of our paths that the bomb had destroyed, we would also end up building a nice landing pad for the helicopter. Everything has a place and everything is now in its place. And with that, it's time that we give the helicopter a proper name. I've decided to go with the name of Vengeance, for what I think would be obvious reasons. And this awesome name was suggested by our good compadre, Flying Squirrel 99, so thank you, sir, and or madam. Marsupial? I don't know. In the meantime, while we're waiting on our new research to be completed, we ended up building some storage shelves in our reactor room. That way we can put all of our uranium in there, as these are the only things we have that actually use uranium. Well, for now that is. But before we get to what I'm alluding to, I think it's a good time for us to go ahead and build plenty of floodlights all around the HQ. One, because most of the wall lights that we were using previously were blown all to hell with the nuclear explosion, of course, and two, because I think it gives it a more uniform, militaristic look. But now, my friends, we get to our little uranium devil. I introduce to you a brand new type of mech known as Mother. Now this abbreviation stands for Mechanized Overseer with Tactical Heavy Energy Response for Enforcement and Retaliation. This is the future, my friends. A brand new class of these mechs that will be piloted and tested by Greffis himself, as he is basically our little super soldier by this point. I thought it fitting, of course, since he was the operator of our previous mech, and sticking with that, we'll also be naming this one Diplomacy Mark II. Perhaps though you doubt the true power of this new mech, allow me to demonstrate. For you see, my friends, Diplomacy Mark II has 2 dual-barrel plasma cannons, as well as a bombardment targeter, which will allow any nearby settlements of ours to actually lock on to a certain section that we target and hit it with a bunch of mortar fire. Now that is some top tier warfare technology if you ask me. Speaking of technology, we had finally harnessed the power of nuclear fusion. Well, we've already had that power in the form of a bomb, but this time it's going to generate power and energy for us in a different way. However, we will also be needing some resources as we're running quite low, but just on time came a Marshall Settlements caravan. These fine men and women of uniform have brought plenty of bulk goods like steel, components, and even a few car parts that we would end up purchasing in exchange, of course, for pistols and rifles and body armor so they can effectively protect their towns. With these resources, we could finally build our very first advanced nuclear-powered generator, and boy oh boy is she bodacious. With all the nukes and everything we've been building, we should really start making somebody some hazmat suits and have them assigned to these areas. Either way though, our power issues were no more, and we should be able to support some new weapons as well with the additional power generation. Now, all this talk about nuclear weapons and power, the little plan we had from last episode where we maybe or maybe not paid someone to assassinate the leader of the RimWorld Marshal Service, it's actually not complete yet. We're going to be flying a small nuclear warhead out towards the Outlands, but we're actually going to the Thromboian Union where we would sell it to them. They've basically become a proxy state of ours, whether they like it or not. And giving them a nuke and or selling them a nuke, that means if they use it against the rebels, it puts more pressure on the rebels, from all sides essentially. If they use it on the Marshals, perhaps we could try and spin it as the rebels giving them the weaponry. We'll figure something out if that happens to be the case. The Union would end up paying us top dollar for that little warhead, and they even gave us a special type of tribal stone. Apparently in their culture, this is a gesture of gratefulness and good faith. It had some interesting properties to it, and because of the neuroformer that is inside of Down's brain, we decided to put it in her lab as she seems to have some sort of connection to it, she says. We weren't back home for very long though before we ended up having a massive raid come our way. It would seem to be many a rebel soldier along with many of their mechanoids as well, some that we had never even seen before. It seems that they're producing more mechs and less vehicles. Either way though, we also saw some tribal soldiers along with them. I found this to be quite unusual, but then I realized that they have now allied with the Confederacy of Banya, meaning most likely that just like us, they too are raising a large tribal faction out of the dirt and molding it into something they need. Unfortunately for them, our military machine doesn't give a shit about cultural backgrounds. We would immediately call in bombardments from some of our nearby settlements, which would destroy a lot of their forces. However, there were still quite a few that remained. We would attempt to run them over, although Diplomacy Mark II wasn't near as fast as Mark I. Luckily, our plasma cannons would do the trick. I witnessed their mechanoid fire off a gigantic blast. Two gigantic blasts. With firepower like that, no doubt this bad boy has some rare metals inside of him, so we ran him over. That way we could deconstruct him and take all of the plasteel and everything. It'll help us out. We would also end up getting some squishy little meat stuck in our treads. Blech. With the battle finally over, we had plenty of rebels that we could also take hostage and keep them as leverage. Now, previously we did think keeping hostages of the rebels would keep them from nuking us, but as we've seen already, that wasn't exactly the case. Now, credit where credit is due, they did only nuke us after failing to infiltrate the base several times, so I digress. Now, you might be asking yourself, Rat Knight, why are you even interested in taking any more rebel prisoners? Well, you see, my friends, the larger our rebel gulag, the more of them that we have, the more points we'll get towards peace when we decide to free them and give them back to the United Rebel Forces. But now, of course, that will only be one after we've taken our revenge for them nuking our base, and also after they're back at war with the Marshals. But before we enact any plans of revenge, we are still going to need to make some improvements to the base once more, and in doing so, we're also going to need some of these precious metals that these mechs have. We'll be using these precious little metals to rebuild our main battery room in the front of the base. Now, before you scold me in the comments section, though, I realize that this isn't exactly the safest place for the battery room, as we've seen seen in prior invasions and bombings, but I am actually going to be doubling up the special armored walls here to try and keep it extra safe. After that, one of our very own settlements had contacted us requesting some simple helmets, as they've been having some issues out of desert bandits and even some more of those cultists here and there. In exchange, they would give us advanced components, hyperweave, and a heavy engine, all of which would come in very handy. Plus, we didn't really mind as we already had plenty of simple helmets in storage. We loaded them up and would take them over to the settlement. Hopefully that'll help them out with their little issue. And hopefully this new engine will help us build some much larger and stronger vehicles. As we were hauling it in though, we spotted a very strange caravan. A good-sized group of people wearing business suits, business attire in the desert of all places. These weren't your standard outlanders. The leader of this little outfit appeared to be an older, more distinguished looking gentleman by the name of Dibbo. It looked like he had some personal security along with him and some armor that we had never seen before, although we obviously weren't all that impressed. Since he and his companions had caught our eye, we decided that we would speak with them. Apparently, he is one of the founding members of a new economic and banking faction called the United Traders, and he was hoping that we might be his first investor. Once things get off the ground, he even said that he would like to maybe hire us as his own personal security force. So we ended up investing 20,000 silver. What's the harm? Even if he were to be lying to us, we'll kick his door in the Outlands and skin him alive. But hopefully we don't need to. And the possibility of us being partnered with a neutral trading faction, could you imagine the money? Meanwhile, back in the base, we were alerted to a global news broadcast by the RimWorld Marshal Service. It would seem to me that they found a temporary replacement for Commander Ross after his little mishap. Governor Pajek, as it were. Ah yes, a declaration of war against the United Rebel Forces. I guess we got our money's worth, eh? It would seem to me that our little scheme is going right according to plan. And step 2 of our 2-step process that I mentioned earlier is complete. Get the Marshals and the Rebels back at war. But we still need to get our revenge for the rebels nuking us. And I think Greffus and his new mech could really help us out with step 1 in getting the revenge that we so require. I realize I'm working backwards. Now, we are a greedy, money-hungry, blood-lusting corporation, but unlike in real life, we do actually care if innocent people get hurt. So instead of attacking a rebel city where there are hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians that could lose their lives, and almost definitely would, we're actually going to be attacking a smaller Oak Foundation military installation near the hills. It's also located just within range of 2 of our settlements, meaning that we'll also be able to use our bombardment targeter for our mortars. This base is most likely the staging ground for many of their attacks against us and the Marshals, and it was absolutely crawling with soldiers along with many of their mech types. It appeared that they also had 2 heavy Saturn-class tanks that were sitting on the outskirts on either side of the base. We'll need to be very careful because one shot from these bad boys could render our mech completely immobile, if not destroy it. We may be tough as nails, but we're not invincible. We began to approach the base, and it was quite a tight squeeze going down the city streets, I'll admit, scraping our guns on the sides of buildings. This would essentially render our plasma cannons useless, but we would be able to use our targeter to have the artillery strikes right in the middle of the base, completely annihilating many of the soldiers and their buildings, meaning they would have to flee their city if they had any hope of trying to defeat us, which they didn't. We then received some exquisite news. It would seem that the Marshals have come to reinforce us. Now, granted, they had only sent a small battalion of men and mechs, but it was better than nothing, and we were happy to have them on our side. Especially since the heavy class tank decided to focus on them, they basically became cannon fodder as we attempted to destroy it, which ultimately we ended up doing. With their heavy class vehicles completely destroyed, the only option that the rebels and the Oak Foundation had were to try to flee the area, which we would allow some of them to do because, why not? Let them go and spread the word of the devastating experience you receive when you cross the SNR Rifle Company. And you know what the best part is? What took them months and months of endless planning, a nuclear bomb, and several failed attempts to try and infiltrate our base only took us a few hours with one singular mech. And once we finally have our headquarters operational at full capacity once more, and we don't have to expend resources on trying to make repairs after their little bomb dropped on us, imagine what we could use those resources on. Perhaps even more of these mechs. We could even use them on different armors and upgrades for our people so that they may utilize these mechs just as Greffus. But sadly, that is still a little bit of time away. As for now, we're going to continue using those resources to try and repair the base and also build some new upgrades to our defenses, such as these very large sentry turrets that we're going to be putting at our eastern entrance. They have about the same damage output as the auto turrets we were previously using, but with a much higher fire rate. A bit of time later, and I had realized that Commando Jr. here was missing his left arm and his right hand. Unfortunately, this would render him completely incapable of manipulation, and as you might imagine, that's a bit of a problem for us. Not to worry though, because we would end up giving him the prosthetic arms that we had previously taken off Greffus when we upgraded him to the bionics. I'm sure we probably washed them before we ended up putting them on Commando Jr. Probably. All seemed to be going quite well, and in our favor finally, once more. We were making awesome repairs to the base, we were upgrading our people. If you can call prosthetics an upgrade, I suppose it's better than having nothing at all. Things were going very swimmingly, but little did I know they were about to get much better. For you see, my friends, our informants in the Outlands have told us of an ongoing battle between a rebel settlement and a Thromboian settlement. Funny enough, that looks like the same Union settlement that we sold the nuclear warhead to. Well, just as we had hoped. It would seem that the rebels in the Confederacy of Banya are completely on the back foot once more. War would once again dominate the two factions, and we now have our revenge. Our plan was a complete success. Now the only thing left for us to do is to make peace with the rebels, once we're ready, I suppose. I'm sure they'll be ecstatic to do so, seeing how they're going to need plenty of weapons if they ever hope to defend themselves. Well, just in case they get a wild hair about them and decide to retaliate against us once more, we're going to continue working on our own defenses. In this case, we're actually building more large sentry turrets on the western entrance of the headquarters. We then ended up having a wild man enter the area. Now this happens quite a bit out here in the desert. Maybe somebody gets a bit too stoned on yayo or something, but this particular man was a bit familiar. None other than the infamous General Hawthorne himself. We sent a squadron down because even without his armor he was still quite dangerous, but it would seem that the naked lad had no recollection of who we even were. As a matter of fact, he wouldn't even speak or form sounds. I think his brain is still mashed potatoes. Since the man is basically a walking super weapon, we decided to arrest him politely and take him back to our prison, where we would actually be delicate and take very good care of him because he's still very dangerous. I'm not exactly sure what we could do with him, but I know it's better than having him wander around the desert where the Marshal Service could find him again. Speaking of which, we're going to be loading up Vengeance to go out and do a little bit of trading with the Marshal Service. Since they are finally back at war with their old enemies, we can sell them some guns once more, which is amazing because not only are we going to be able to trade for a lot of different things like car parts and other things that I wanted, but we're also going to be able to make a holy shit ton of silver and gold. Oh god, I gotta tell you, it feels so good to be back in business once more. Just like the good old days. Now, some of you might be wondering as to why we were buying more car parts. Did you have a vehicle in mind, Rat Knight? Well, my friend, indeed I did. We are going to be creating a Striker CAV vehicle. You can think of it kind of like an upgrade from our Rattlesnake and our Sand Viper vehicles that we've had in the past. Not only does it have an additional weapon, meaning that it has much more firepower, but the armor of this vehicle is much much stronger. And of course, I will bestow the honors of giving it a name onto you guys. It would also seem that while Scott was out previously doing his gun trading in the helicopter, he had picked up a newspaper from one of the Marshall settlements. It seems that they're reporting on the assassination of Commander Ross and the war between the rebels and Marshals. I suppose those are some pretty hot topics at the moment. But my friends, we are now winding down to the end of this episode, and I do have some pretty grievous news. I think next episode will be the last episode of Season 2 of this series. There also will not be a Season 3, or at least not in the sense of it being the Gun Empire. Of course, the overall universe, and really even the Gun Empire series, is going to continue, but with a different name and kind of premise, and also we'll be following some different people. As far as I can think, I'm thinking that I'm going to call it RimWorld Rags to Riches, something like that. You've probably seen similar titles and ideas with other types of games. Now, this isn't exactly the same type of thing as what you might see in like The Sims or somewhere like that, but it is going to be a new original series that is going to continue the Gun Empire as well as the RKRU universe as a whole. I would love to show you something on the screen for it, like a thumbnail or something, but I haven't came up with anything just yet, except for the mod list, which is going to be very similar to this one. You know, I'm having a lot of fun in Season 2 here, but I am very limited by this save file being from the previous version of RimWorld, and all the mods that we've been using, a lot of them are still outdated and stuff like that, so I couldn't exactly do everything that I wanted to do, but I'm pretty happy with what we've accomplished in Season 2 and kind of the direction that we're taking it. I do want to ask you guys, though, because we are looking for some official names for the United Rebel Forces in our Gun Empire series in the RKRU. So if you guys have any great names for the rebels, be sure to leave that in the comment section down below. You very well could be the person that names the entire nation of the rebels. But I love you guys ever so much. I hope you've enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.